Today, the topic is none other than the man from the Double Cross Ranch in Amarillo, Texas, your old buddy, Terry Funk. One of the all time greats, there's no doubt about that. When did you first meet the Funkster and become friends with Terry Funk?
Well, I met Terry in 1972. I had a unique experience. It was the only time I met Funk Sr. And I was on, I believe, it was in Tampa. They were headlining the cards. It was the Funks against the Briscoes, which was one. It's now kind of passed over because of the time, but that feud was as great as any feud in the history of wrestling. And we'll talk about how innovative they were, way ahead of their time. I met him in '72, and Eddie and Senior were very dear friends. In fact, Eddie worked for Senior as Rip Rogers in Amarillo, and he took every idea that Senior had. And when he bought into Florida, he used every idea, meaning A, he made wrestling part of the community. He started the Sheriff's Boys Ranch for wayward boys and, children without mothers and fathers. He started the Sheriff's Girls Ranch, and he started the amateur wrestling in Florida, just like Funk. Everything I'm saying that they did, he took it from Funk. I mentioned this before. When I was a kid there, I was given an award for my work with the youth in Tampa. There was always, if a police officer died in duty, he was always given a check for, I don't know how long, but I think it was a year. He got a percentage of every house show. Firemen the same way. We had the state representatives. We had the representatives from the state house, the national state house, and every place else. And Eddie made wrestling because of Funk. He made wrestling. Wow, they're part of our community and they do good. And when we did a hot angle, they would kind of turn their cheek or make believe they went up and didn't see it. And we because of that, we got away with a lot of violence. And people always talk about Florida and Amarillo being a wrestling territory. Yes, there was wrestling on the top of the bill, meaning Dory Jr. and Jack Briscoe. But what drew the people in was Dusty and Terry. Uh, 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 Joe LeDuc, uh, whoever. There was built on violence, but it always ended with wrestling. And Eddie gave the people a little bit of everything. He'd have great matches. I've mentioned it before. Billy Robinson against Tony Charles. Tony Charles versus Les Thornton, and and those guys would go back and forth. There was a connection when you finished up in Florida. The first place they would say to you is you'd fit great in Amarillo. J.J. Dillon. I met J.J. Dillon in Amarillo. When I met J.J. Dillon when he had high cheekbones and looked like a model, you know, he wasn't wearing extra large pants at the time. J.J. was great, and people don't understand this. They just know J.J. as a manager, and as great a manager as he was as great a wrestler as he was a manager. JJ was fabulous. So we had a connection there. And then I told you off screen, they used to do angles, and it was like college teams against one another. One of the first angles I ever saw, and I'll get back to senior later, was they did this angle, and this was thought out. Uh, so it came out brilliant. The angle they did, this is when Briscoe was chasing Junior. And they would go 60 minutes, they would go 90 minutes. It was incredible matches they'd have. But this one night, they were going 60 minutes through to a draw. And Senior was at ringside, rightfully so, coaching his son. And as it got to 59 minutes, Junior had slapped on the figure four. And those days, people didn't kick out of finishes. And as he made the turn for the third time, which usually made guys quit, Jack reversed it and got into the figure four. At that time, it was like Senior was excited and he bumped into the table, which made the bell ring. And there was like 58 seconds left. Well, they stopped the match. They thought the match was over. So now it got a lot of heat that Senior knocked the bell, right? But they taped that match and then they sent it to Amarillo, and Chet Thorpe, who people know who Bruce Thorpe is. Bruce owned the NWA for a while. Bruce Thorpe's dad was the ring announcer. Prior to that, when Junior had the spinning toe hold on Jack, Chet got up and bounced into the table. Well, you couldn't hear it, but they made it louder on the tape. They could hear it, and it looked like Chet was in on the thing, and he saved Jack from giving up. And they used to do that all the time. Those kind of angles, and they were the first ones I ever saw. Think about this. And this is again territory. You're sitting home watching this, and if I'm sitting in Florida, I'm watching, I'm saying, oh, those Funks, those no good son of a gut, boy, they really did Jack wrong. And then if I'm in Amarillo and I'm watching that, I'm saying, oh, that Chet Thorpe from Florida, they had that all construed to make sure that Jack Briscoe didn't give up to Junior. It was brilliant back then. Nobody thought that way. Nobody thought that way. And they were so smart. But I'll go back to Senior. Eddie asked him to do him a favor to watch my match. I came upstairs. They had this little room that was enclosed in glass. I went in, and Senior sat me down and said, I liked some of your stuff. He told me some of the stuff he didn't like. And he said, what I did like was you made everything look real. He looked me dead in the eye and said, when they stop believing in this, they're going to stop coming. And lo and behold, back in the day, I'm not saying they drew the money they do today. Most territories ran 2-3 towns a night, and there was wrestling 360 days a year, and there was a lot of people making a very good living because of people that were smart, like Senior and Eddie Graham, and not just those two. So I became friends with Terry after that. I got to work with Terry quite a bit. Not as much as I would have liked to, because usually Terry was a heel and I was a heel too. But I worked with Terry a lot when I was a young boy. He would come to Florida. I worked with him quite a bit as a baby face. And you want to hear the greatest high spot I ever saw in my life?
Oh yeah.
This is psychology. This is the heat of the feud with the Briscoes have been going on for 3.5 years. It's Miami, and everybody in my era always says it was sold out to the rafters. Well, I can say that because I'm not talking about myself. It was sold out. Briscoes against the Funks. And this was what worked perfectly. Junior and Terry were so diametrically opposed as brothers and partners. It was like, what's wrong with this? One's Dr. Jekyll, the other one's Mr. Hyde, right?
Yep.
And it works so well. So they go to the ring. They get in the ring, and he wants to fight at the bit to go after the Briscoes. Junior's holding them back. He puts Terry outside the ring, has him hold the rope that they used to have. Terry starts to bolt in. He pushes them back. Referee says, if you don't come out to instructions, one of you, we're going to DQ the match before it gets. He calms Terry down after 3 minutes. Terry jumping up and trying to get in the Briscoes. Tell him, come on, we'll beat you up right now. Now, I had just worked 15 minutes prior to this and did everything I thought was wonderful. So, what happens is Junior comes out as the world champion. They get the instructions, and he shakes hands with both Briscoes, even though he's a heel. He's the world champion. Made it classy, right? Now the Briscoes turn their back, start heading back to their corner. Junior turns his back, starts to head back to his corner, right? Terry makes a beeline after the Briscoes. The whole building explodes. Jack turns around. Terry puts on the brakes like Wile E. Coyote, and all of a sudden he sticks out his hand to shake Jack's hand. The building blew. And I said to myself, I just wasted 15 minutes of my life trying to get over it. And this guy just stole the show on a handshake. Terry was that good. When would get vicious. And the thing was with Terry is wrestling was real with Terry. I've been in a lot of matches with Terry, and if you didn't lace your boots up, there was no as friendly as Terry and I have been over the years. There was no being friends in the ring with Terry Funk, and I think I can talk to anybody that ever worked with Terry. One time when he was working with Flair after that pile driver incident, I was in the airport, and Terry and I were on one of those little trams going to catch a plane. And Terry had his shirt open, he had his back turned, and I saw him rubbing himself. I said, Terry, what are you doing? He turned around, and he was putting preparation H on his chest. His chest looked like it had been burnt. Flair had chopped him so hard for maybe 15, 20 days straight. And people that say, well, some of Rick's matches weren't physical. Matches were physical, and the Funk and Flair matches were about as physical as any matches I've ever seen. And if you were sitting there and didn't know wrestling was real or fake, first time you've been in there, Maybe you weren't so sure on the underneath card, but when you saw those two, you went home saying, "Boy, that was real." I don't doubt that wrestling's real. They were they had terrific matches too, and everybody talks about uh, Rick and Steamboat as technically as good as those matches were. And I'm not taking anything away from Ricky Steamboat, one of the greatest workers of all time. I personally liked that physical violence that they gave. It was whoa. Not that Steamboat and Flair didn't, but when Funk and Flair together, it was whoa. It can't get any realer than this.
Those matches were unbelievable. They were awesome. And we were talking about last week, we were talking about how Flair was so good and so adaptable. He can have a good match with Steamboat and be a wrestling match, and then have a great match with Funk. It'd be an absolute brawl. And Funk is kind of the one that obviously turns Flair. He was a face, kind of. I mean, he was a heel, obviously, and then it kind of turns him into a baby face because of the power of Terry Funk and how great he was and how great of a character he was.
In 2 minutes, Rick was booed out of the building, booed, and 2 minutes later they were cheering him. And a guy I would like to see, and I know they had one match. I don't know if they had two matches, but a guy that, if I could say, I'd like to see a match at the peak of Terry's career would be the Blood Hunter, because we know about the Blood Hunter chopping a tree with his hand and blood coming out. He didn't know if he should get stitched up or not. His hands open up. He reminds me, he's there ain't many Terry Funks. There's no Terry Funks, but he's pretty close to being a Terry Funk. I'd love to see that.
So is Funk, was he really crazy, or was he crazy like a fox?
He was crazy like a fox, and he was brilliant on finishes. He was brilliant on finishes. Uh, Junior was the booker in a lot of places, and Junior was successful in a lot of places. But he had one of the greatest minds to call. And no disrespect to Junior. Junior was a smart guy. But if I ever had a question, I'd ask Terry Funk, what do you think, Terry? Terry still ribs me 30 years later. I wanted to come in the ring one time when we were going to have a heel versus heel match against Terry. And it was July, and it was in Atlanta, and I wanted to come in with a snow shovel and hit him. And I said, Terry, don't you understand? They'll be saying, where do you get a snow shovel? And he looked at me like I came out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Without saying it, I knew it was the shits. So Terry he was raised in the business. His father was one of the smartest guys in the business. He was around a lot of smart guys. He was, again, he was around Eddie. He was around Jim Barnett. He was around uh, Tully's dad, Joe Blanchett. He was around Morris Siegel. He was around Paul Bosch. He, he was a huge. It, okay, I'm going to name what I think of the biggest stars in the history of Japan. Hanson, Brody, the Funks, the Sheik, Abdullah, and Tiger Jet Singh. Steve, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Terry Gordy. And to get over in Japan like they were. And Vader, I don't want to forget Vader. God bless Vader. Those guys got over in Japan. You know that when Terry and Dory went to Japan, all the Americans were heels. They turned into huge baby faces there. And it wasn't just because of Junior. Terry was a huge influence on turning babyface. Terry, I don't know if you have you ever seen the match with Terry and Junior against Abby and the Sheik when the Sheik stabs Terry in the shoulder with the fork, and Terry's running around the ring with a fork in his shoulder.
Yep.
It's one of the greatest spots of all times, and he turned babyface because of that, and the way he fell out. And I'm going to tell you something. I learned this from Terry. I never told him this. I learned it from. He might have charged me anyway, but a lot of guys just say, "How come you don't take flat back bumps?" Well, everybody takes a flat back bump. Watch Terry Funk take a bump. He stumbles, he fumbles, he falls over, he falls sideways, he falls on his face, he may fall on his side. Once in a while, he'll take that and go to his back. Terry looked like he was in a street fight when he sold. And I saw that and I said, and I don't know how I saw that. I said, wow, this guy really, really's got his business down to a T. He does everything different than anybody does. And it's amazing. He used to take this bump. It was called the Dead Man's Walk. Have you ever heard of it, John?
Sounds familiar, but now I'm trying to think of what bump it is because he's such a good bumper and he's so unique that he has a couple different cells where you just absolutely you fall in love with his brilliance of the way he does it so differently than everyone else.
The way he would do it was, I couldn't do it because I didn't have the cojones to do it. I think I did it once. I splattered my head. He would do that thing where, especially when he worked with a madman like Sheik or Abdullah, he would get pounded. And they would end up on the apron. The guy would be pounding him, usually from the ringside. And Terry would be, his head would be rolling, and his eyes would be rolling. And Terry would take this step like he was stepping in midair, nothing there. His left foot would still be on the apron, and he fall forward on his face. And how he could keep his left foot on the apron till he hit the cement. That's before we had mats. I couldn't believe what he could do. There's no way anybody could say, "Oh, that's prearranged. People know how to do that." There's no way. He was so good at so many things, and to get heat, you know, to me, I will talk about this forever. Heat is what draws money, and the guys that knew how to get heat were Terry Funk, Mark Lewin, Abdullah the Butcher. I'm talking to my era. The younger guys know how to get heat too. Uh, the Sheik, Tiger Jet Singh, who we didn't see much because he spent most of the time in Canada and Japan and the Pacific Rim, but they knew how, and then Hanson and Brody, of course. But Terry, if I have to say, Terry's up in the top 5 guys that ever get heat. And they lived on heat in that territory of Amarillo for a long time. And they also had wrestling on the marquee, and they would end the show with wrestling on the marquee. His dad invented the Texas Death Match. We talked about that. So, I mean, the Funks have changed the wrestling business in a great way.
Now, Terry Funk, we're saying crazy like a fox, stuff like that. Is he a big part of your
No,
drinker, drug user, anything like that? Because he does seem
no,
like middle aged and crazy and off the wall. But was he ever a partier or anything like that?
no. Terry, the only thing when Terry's younger, he would drink beer, which everybody drank beer. Terry was, you know, I guess they would call it straight edge today, but I mean, he would drink his beer and that would be it. And, Terry, to this day, he gets up and jogs and he's in good shape. And the bottom line about Terry Funk, he's a good man. Terry's a very, very good man. I was lucky enough to be involved in an angle that was Terry's last angle so far. He's retired 126 times, but I was in, and I was lucky enough to go to dinner with his lovely wife Vicky before she passed on. And if you saw those two together, it was like a love story. It was like they were 16 years old on their first date. They had something special, and he's raised two wonderful girls. And Terry Funk, I think there's a reason why Terry Funk's a lot of guys' hero, and he's definitely my hero.
With Funk, just being who he is and, a former NWA world champion, such a great legendary wrestler. How did he get into like the crazy world of death matches and ECW and that? Because it seems like, okay, Dory Funk, the wrestler, Dory Funk Sr., the wrestler, Terry Funk, the NWA champion, the wrestler. How does he go from that extreme all the way to wild and crazy? Like you said, I know they did do some Texas death matches stuff back in the day, but it seems like a complete opposite, a complete 180. He goes from one direction to the other, although he always had that in him, the brawling style. But the death matches and the ECW style just seems like, wow, Terry Funk does not need to do that kind of stuff.
The smartest guy knew he was a dinosaur, and he knew he had to evolve to stay current, and he certainly did that. Terry has always been ahead of the curve. I've watched Terry change from a complete wrestler to my eye, to him and Cactus and rings blowing up on fire against, wasn't it the Sheik and Sabu? I mean, he knows how to adapt. Terry Funk could go out today and steal the show. I certainly would. First of all, it would never happen. But I'd hate to be the guy that had to follow a Terry Funk match. You must be whistling in a graveyard at midnight if you had to follow a Terry Funk match. That's for sure.
Did you ever think like, okay, I know you've done them too and have been involved in some crazy wild brawls, but when he started doing death matches and stuff, did you ever like say, Terry, you lost your mind here? What are you thinking about here, Terry?
I knew Terry is one of the toughest human beings I've ever met. And when you work with Terry, it's not a work. He's hit me in my head as hard as I've been hit by anybody in a street fight when I was a kid. He's chopped me in my chest as hard as Rick. He's flying mad me and kicked me in my back till my ribs I thought were going out. Terry Funk is the epitome of a wrestler, and I never complained because I knew that if I was going to work with Terry Funk in my limited ability, I was going to have the best match on the card because Terry's going to make damn sure I did. I remember the last time I wrestled him, I think it was in Ames, Iowa, somewhere in Iowa. And it was a big house, and he had chopped me and whacked me and everything to me. And we had gone about 15 minutes. We had gone over 15 minutes, and the promoter said, go 15 minutes. And I think I heard them say 15 minutes gone, like 3 minutes prior to that. And I said to Terry, you ready to go home? He said, no, and you're not either. And I thought, oh, boy. But the last 15 minutes were the best, and I'm glad we had that last 15 minutes to be together.
With Terry, and obviously he's got so many legendary feuds and legendary matches. You worked him a bunch in ECW. I know you worked him in Georgia Championship Wrestling. You worked him in Florida. You had a Boston Street Fight in Florida with Terry Funk, but in ECW you worked him quite a bit. Do you remember that? And what are your memories on wrestling him in ECW? Because I know you guys had some tag matches, some multiple man matches, but you wrestled him a lot in ECW.
If funny thing, I saw Stan Hansen about a year ago. It's longer than that now. 2 years ago, and Stan and I were talking about a funny incident. It was, I believe, it was Hansen and Brody. No, it was Hansen and Abdullah.
No, Hansen and Funk versus you and Abdullah.
Yeah, that's what it was. And we came in, and the four of us were sitting by ourselves. And one of us said, hey, what are we going to do? They said, we'll get with you later. And at the time, all four of us were working for different companies in Japan. So they came up to us again. They said, well, we need to finish. And I said, well, what do you want? Well, you guys working amongst yourself. And we all looked at each other and started laughing. And we said, how are we going to do this to get a DQ? He just said, we'll just fight all over the building like we usually do. And everybody started laughing because everybody knew nobody was going to put anybody over. Not that we'd be an egomaniacs, but it would have hurt our standings because all of us at that time were working in Japan full time. And it would have hurt. It wasn't that we were just protecting ourselves. We were helping the companies we were working for because that would have hurt the company.
Yeah, it ends up being a DQ is specifically that match. But what a star-studded match, especially for that point in ECW in '94. It was very, very star-studded. Actually, '93, not even '94, and it was 1993. So super star-studded match for ECW back then.
And if you really look back at it, John, that's what made ECW was Terry Funk. Putting the belt on Terry Funk was a genius move by Paulie Dangerously. Paulie did a great thing. He put it on a legend, an icon. I mean, it's like I'm sick of talking about Terry. I want to get paid. Terry, if you listen to this, I hope you send me something, a dead stare or something. But I mean, it was a smartest thing. You put it on a guy that was one of the last of the NWA champions. That was very smart. And then afterwards with Shane and the matches they had, it worked out fabulously. Terry passed the torch. And again, Terry did something most of the people didn't do. He passed the torch. He passed it to Shane, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most guys didn't pass the torch, and he did. And Terry is one of the things that I admire about Terry Funk is he is a wrestling fan, the same as you, the same as me. We're all three of us wrestling fans. We all can relate to one another because we want the business to be good. It's like when we talk to Hannibal on his YouTube platform. Hannibal is a wrestling fan. He wouldn't be so passionate about it if he wasn't. And it isn't a lot of guys that stay wrestling fans for their whole life. And Terry has been a wrestling fan for his whole life.
Yeah, big time. And the interesting thing is he actually loses it in that crazy, crazy barbed wire match to Sabu, and then Shane beats Sabu and Terry Funk in a three-way. So he does put over Shane, but there's a little bit of that crazy barbed wire match. I don't know if you remember that well. It's Born to Be
Yeah.
Wired. Crazy, crazy match.
Do you remember how Sabu was so white? He was like in a cocoon. Do you remember that, John?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
The wire around him, you know.
it was a
That
vicious match. Yeah.
oh, it was vicious, a vicious match. And the thing is, Sabu has no pain threshold. Neither does Terry. I think as intelligent as Shane is, he must have a little, I would think. But, he gets involved in it too. But, I mean, didn't they have to go after the match? It took them about 20 minutes to cut Sabu out of that wire.
I know. I don't know how long it was, but I know the story goes that they had to like cut him free, and he was pretty, obviously pretty damaged from it.
Didn't they have to get crazy glue, the kind they use in operations to glue his arm back together?
That is the old story, yeah. And I know a lot of these CW guys would use crazy glue whenever
Yeah,
they had cuts and stuff instead of going to the hospital.
yeah, yeah.
Crazy world. And Terry Funk was, literally, in it and not taking it easy, going crazy, taking crazy bumps, doing crazy stuff. I mean, he was one of the best things about ECW when he was there, and he really, did a lot to get Shane over, get a lot of guys over. And we're talking about all his feuds. I mean, we're talking about Shane, his feud with Sabu, but kind of changing gears. I just want to get your thoughts on this because I know you were buddies with Dusty Rhodes. But what about his feud with Dusty? It seemed like a very legit feud. This is going back years. I talked to Dusty about it. He still hated Funk. This is, right before he passed 5 years ago. He still hated Funk then. And I talked to Funk last year. I did an interview with him. He still hates Dusty, even though Dusty
Yeah,
passed on. What is going on? Is this a legit, real life heated feud between Dusty and Funk?
it's like they love to hate one another. It's like they really, I mean, in the bottom of their hearts, they love one another, but they love to keep it going that they hate one another because they drew so much money when they worked together. And there was a bit of a rivalry in the ring. If you want, when I was saying that Terry's was solid in the ring and he let you know he was there. Especially that some people know he was there. And Dusty was one of them. And Dusty would let you know too. If you cross Dusty, when I worked with Dusty I worked for Dusty 3 years almost every night. And there was sometimes he'd get pissed off at me about something, and he would let me have it in the ring. And if you didn't fight back, he was going to eat you up. And they always had it, but there was a love hate relationship with them, and they loved each other. They they would say they hated each other, but they loved each other. Both West Texas boys, both went to West Texas. Uh, Dusty started in Amarillo, went to Tony Santos and wrestled Frank Scarpa for the U.S. title. I think the first real match he ever had outside of Amarillo, and there was back then there was a little bit of jealousy amongst them all, amongst the Dusty, Terry, Rick, Roddy. There was a little bit of jealousy, but they all loved each other and they made money with each other. So it's kind of hard to really dislike somebody when you're making all that money. And they would come up with very good creative. And that's what was good was they would try to out create one another. And was lucky enough to be around it, not to participate in it, but to listen to what they did. And they would come up with some unbelievable stuff. And I knew it was good because this is the time when I was told you that I was kind of the surrogate son. And I was be right with Eddie, and I'd say to him, "What are you going to do for Dusty?" And Terry said, "That's the only good thing about this. I don't have to do anything. They'll come up with something. I may have to hone it a little and be able to allow it on TV, but they took pride to tell Eddie they knew what was going on. They were his pupils too, so they were the star pupils.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that real rivalry goes back to college, right? Because
Yeah,
Dusty played behind Funk on the football team.
yeah, it goes back a long time. I mean, and the sad thing is now that Dust isn't here. I mean, I didn't read Dusty's book until he had passed, and it was the saddest thing for me. One of the saddest things that I didn't read it because he said some incredibly nice things about me, and I wish I had read it when he wrote it because you know when you're in there with somebody for quite a bit, you're giving your body, you're trying to give it your all. You learn to respect one another, and then sometimes, it's like family. You fall out with your brother, and then he's still your brother. And those two were brothers to the end.
With Funk being obviously, such a legend, he could do it all. He could talk, he could wrestle, he could brawl. He's one of those five-tool players. He kind of had everything you'd want in a pro wrestler. He was always drawing money wherever he went. He was such a big star. But kind of like behind the scenes and stuff, you said he was a great man and very friendly. Was he always that way, or is that kind of when he got older? Was he always was
Oh,
so easy to going and helpful with the boys?
oh, with the boys, yeah. If he saw that you wanted it, Terry wouldn't hunt you out. You'd have to hunt Terry out. Or if he saw something that maybe you were timid and you were afraid to ask him, he would help you. But the other thing is, he's tougher than leather, brother. I've seen him slap the shit out of people at bars. I'm saying, oh, Christ. Terry, Terry would slap a guy, and I would say to myself, Jesus, I wish I could punch that hard. He would slap them in the. I mean, it almost looked like a work. He would drop them so quick. And I thought, God, but Terry is, I mean, look what he did for Shane Douglas. Look what he did for Sabu. Look what he did for Taz. Look what he did for a lot of guys. Tommy Dreamer. Tommy Dreamer still talks about. I mean, he did a lot for a lot of people. Barry Windham. He took Barry Windham from at 17 or 18 years old, made him a superstar. I mean, Dusty new talent too. That's what he got from Eddie Graham. Eddie Graham knew what talent was, and Dusty picked that up. And again, Jim Barnett knew what talent was, and that's where he picked that up too. And again, they were Dusty was around some of the smartest guys, and there was another smart guy that Dusty was around that I never mentioned. Is Gary Hart. Gary Hart was a very smart guy. very smart. Mark Lewin, brilliant, brilliant. In 1953, I think uh, Mickey Mantle made 17 grand that year. Mark was 18 years old, was Argentina Rocker's partner, made $123,000. Think about that, 1953. Mark was a genius. He went to Australia, blew that open. I went to Singapore with Mark, uh, that part of the world for 6 months. He blew that place open. He was just Mark, in Dusty's book, he said the greatest heel and the greatest babyface was Mark Lewin. And he also mentioned, the Sheik was second greatest heel, and he was around the Sheik. And Dusty sold like Mark. Uh, pretty talented.
Now, as far as Dusty and Funk, Funk tells a story about how he would say, hey, fatso. And Dusty would confront him and get in his face. He said, no, I said, isn't that so? Isn't that so? They teased each other a lot, I guess.
Yeah, we'd be going through the airports, and Dusty would be ahead of us. Terry and I would be walking, and Terry would go, fatso, fatso. And Dusty would turn, and he'd hide behind something. And he'd go, fatso, fatso. He'd turn. And then when they finally met, he said, what do you call me fatso? He said, I didn't call you fatso. I said, is that so? Yeah.
Funk is a nut. That's for sure. When you look back at his career and just obviously would span so many times, like you said, 127 retirements that he had throughout his career. But what do you think is kind of like the legacy of Terry Funk?
The greatness of the man. Besides being a great wrestler, he was a great family man. And, you know, I go back to when him and Vicky were holding hands. They looked like they're 16. And that said it all for me.
And with Funker, where do you rank him? I know last week we said Flair, probably the GOAT. Where do you rank Funk on that list?
If Rick is the greatest, he's 1A and Terry's 1B. Because the difference was Rick was a champion longer, right?
Hmm.
And Terry gave up the belt for family reasons. So I rate them 1A and 1B, and that's no disrespect to Holly or Dusty or anybody else. But in my generation, the guys that I saw, it's Rick and Dusty. I mean, Rick, Terry.
And Terry.
Yeah.
As far as him giving up the title, why? What was the family reasons of giving up the title?
Well, he was on the road so much. Those guys were on the road 360, at least 358 days a year. They didn't get home but 4 or 5 days, maybe 15, but it was ridiculous. They used to have to go to spot shows. I remember when Kerry Von Erich was world champion. He came in from Florida as the world champion, where he was world champion for a week, and he wrestled in Melbourne, Florida. Melbourne was a spot show that we ran once every 8 months, and it never drew. I thought they belittled the world title.
as far as the Funker, we're saying, 1A, 1B, one of the greatest of all time. I just want to throw it out there. Got to watch if you haven't seen it out there, folks. New York Knockout Clash of the Champions, Flair versus Funk, 5-star match from David Meltzer. I think it's definitely deserving of it. One of the greatest matches. One of my favorite Funk matches. There's a million of them, but that's just one of my favorites. Just absolutely love that match. And I know, Kevin, that's near and dear to your heart because you had something to do with booking it.
Yeah, I did, and they pulled it off much better than I thought anybody could. To get
Now,
booed out of the building and cheered, booed in the building and cheered on the way out is something.